the music again. Let's see if it works.
I think you're too late.
Let me do it. That doesn't matter. We're good. Let's go. Let's do this. To speak, we'll be bringing you up gradually. We'll be rotating the panel as always, and yeah, should be good. Frank, welcome to the stage. I think it's your first time on the roundtable, man.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate the invite.
Appreciate you accepting and coming on such short notice. I see James here in the audience. James, I've just sent you through an invite, and let me DM it to you as well. Nick, you're ready for another mini marathon?
Always ready, man. That's what I'll say anyway. That's my story.
We'll give it another couple of minutes, everyone. So as you know, anything you can share with us, please put it in the comments, bottom right corner. And yeah, I've sent out the invites for speakers not working. I think it's better now. Breaking 4 News, do request again. Wall Street Silver, I've sent you the invite as well. It's weird, it's not working. Woke Societies, I've sent you through the invite. It seems it's not going through. I see a lot of you in the audience. I'm just invite you again.
If I can see it here, I'll.
James, I've sent you the
wait,
invite.
I can't. Oh, I'm not co-host. Never mind.
Oh, you're not co-host yet. Let me send it to you now. Just done. All right, so we got Rose Alerts. The OGs are in the house. We do have Frank. We have Woke Societies on the stage for the first time. Breaking 4 News on stage as well. James, I've sent you through a couple of invites. It should work. I've DM'd it to you as well. Ian will be joining in a bit. All right, just getting there. Nick, you got to turn off notifications on your end, man.
I just did. Yep.
All right, let's do this. Ian, how are you? Let me send you a course invite.
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good, man. Good. It was an epic space over the weekend, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
That was crazy.
Maybe this one will be just as good.
Yeah. Well, I just don't think we could beat Chinese balloons popping up randomly across the country.
The balloon marathons.
Was not.
Yeah, we haven't had a breaking news marathon in a while. But thanks to China.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but that was one of our most listened to spaces here recently.
It was.
Breaking news spaces always get the most traction, and for good reason, because this is where the press and people just come to get updates. And we had an incredible audience. A lot of big names were in the audience. But I do want to welcome James. James has been on the stage before. Good to have you back. Aaron, a regular, Wall Street Silver. Good to have you back as well. And then we got Breaking for News and Rose Alerts, who are regulars. Woke Societies, Frank, both. He for the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, and Dr. Dinesh, another regular. We've got a lot of speakers that will be coming up gradually throughout the space. So if you are requesting, feel free to DM me. If we can't see your request, I will be rotating the panel to keep updates coming on. But Nick, you've been following the story. I know Rose Alerts and Mateas from Breaking 4 News have been following the story as well. Maybe you can kick it off, Nick, and then we'll go to Mateas and Rose Alerts for any further updates that you might have missed.
Sure. So this story kind of begins on February 3rd when a train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. There's about 4,700 residents there, 50 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. And so that gives you a little bit of an idea. 50 of the train's 150 cars ran off the tracks on its route to Madison, Illinois, or from Madison, Illinois to Conway, Pennsylvania. It was carrying some hazardous materials, notably vinyl chloride, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. It's very explosive, and fearful of a major explosion, the authorities ended up carving out an evacuation zone, and then decided to carry out a controlled, quote-unquote, release of toxic fumes to neutralize burning cargo in some of the cars. Then they got really worried about a major explosion, and then obviously you saw what happened. Now there were some experts, quote unquote, that were saying that if they didn't carry out this controlled explosion, that it would end up sending these cars, like missiles across the town. And so that was their justification for doing it, apparently.
Hold on, I don't know. Sorry, Nick, what's the justification again? I didn't understand what you said. Sending cars via missiles, what?
The pressure.
Yes.
They have to basically do a controlled burn. So they made it blow up, but it was a controlled explosion, right? Because if they didn't do that, it would have been a lot worse.
Okay, so how
if you see
how would have been? Sorry, Nick, just quickly, Ian. Would it be worse? How?
I mean, all the cars would go flying, and then shit tons of debris would fly all over the place. It'd be a horrible disaster. Worse
so
than
the pressure will essentially get all the cars essentially to explode and fly around.
Yeah,
so you'd have shrapnel.
Essentially,
yeah.
So projectiles.
I mean, how would that be much
Frank
worse?
has his hand up. I think he could probably speak on this.
Yeah, we'll go in a bit. We'll go to Frank in a bit. Wall Street, go ahead. And then Rose, you wanted to add something, and then we'll go to Frank.
I mean, I guess my comment would be how could that be any worse than what they're doing right now? They're spreading. There's literally clouds, and this stuff is raining down over a huge radius right now. So I think there's going to be a lot of second guessing going on over the strategy of just letting it burn.
So let me jump in real quick. So this happened. I'll find out what date, but this happened a long time ago, where a train cars destroyed a whole town. So that's why they were afraid that it was going to happen to this town. So.
Are you talking about another incident in the United States?
Yeah, another that happened, I think, 10 or 20 years ago. But yeah, they were afraid that if this happened, it would probably destroy the town. So probably that's why.
Gotcha. Awesome. Frank, so we'll bring you in first. We're going to go very deep into this story, guys. There's a lot to talk about here. We covered the basics just a little bit, but we're going to get some initial feedback, and then we're going to take a deep dive into the questions.
If we drop Frank? You down, don't take offense. We have a system where we'll be rotating speakers in and out. So yeah, just so you know.
Yeah, cool, man. All right, Frank, let's kick it off. Give us an overview. What do we know? What are the facts? And I know, Mateas, you've always given overviews of different stories. What facts do we know? And then obviously there's a lot of theories floating around, which we dig into a bit later.
All right, I appreciate that. First off, I'm a degreed mechanical engineer. I live in the state of Ohio, west of the crashes incident. I was aware of it on Friday, didn't really think much of it. Frankly, Sunday night, it hit my Twitter feeds from some local sources that I was watching, and I could tell the situation was escalating. Number one thing was the vinyl chloride, 5 tankers of that, 20 to 28,000 gallons per tanker, a pretty significant amount of a hazardous monomer, they call it. It's basically a solvent. for anyone that's not in the chemical business, you can kind of think of this like paint thinner. That's pretty close in terms of like chemical properties in layman's terms. So you've got 20,000 gallons, let's say, of paint thinner in a tanker that's crashed on its side and being heated by miscellaneous fires that have been caused by the train wreck. Normally, these tankers have what's called a pressure relief valve on them, so that if the tanker is getting heated and pressure builds in the pressure relief valve, the relief valve opens. This is akin to what you have on your hot water heater down in your basement. Every hot water heater in the United States by code has a pressure relief valve on it. Mythbusters did a great show years ago showing hot water heaters with the pressure relief valves plugged shut. If you continue to heat the water in the water heater and the pressure relief valve is unable to relieve that pressure, you literally create a missile. The pressure continues to build, and as the liquid inside the vessel changes phases from the liquid state into a vapor state, it can no longer just absorb heat energy. It actually starts to develop pressure, and you can create a missile. So what they had was 5 tankers, vinyl chloride, one of whom had a pressure relief valve that was stuck shut with an external heat source, which they couldn't extinguish for whatever reason, I don't know. The decision had to be made, okay, do we go in and just let this thing burn itself out? Or do we go in and try to breach the tanker in order to relieve the pressure? They were monitoring the temperatures of the tankers and noticed that the one with the stuck relief valve was actually increasing in temperature. And what that indicates is that the phase change of the contents internally had gone from the liquid state into the vapor state, which means you're about to have an extreme buildup of pressure, which would turn this thing either into a rocket or more likely just a big old vapor bomb. So by doing the controlled release, they punched a hole, I'm not sure, probably using robotics or who knows what, but they punched a hole in the side of the tanker to allow the pressurized liquid contents to flow out of the tanker into a ditch, wherein they lit it then with a flare. And that's, the mushroom cloud that everybody's seen on the news, et cetera. Now, for anyone second guessing this decision, I'm in the industry. I'm in the chemical industry, the hazardous waste industry. I understand the chemical properties of what's involved here. I think that was the right decision because regardless, it doesn't look like they were able to put the fire out. So you had 2 decisions to make. Do we just let the fire burn and become a bomb? Or do we let the fire burn all at once and not become a bomb? And they chose option 2. Relieve the pressure, save the town, save the 500 people or whatever that didn't evacuate from God knows what injuries, and that's that.
So we are talking about a major explosion here. I mean, there is a photo of it at the top, pinned to the top here. Do you think, Frank, did they wait too long? Was that the issue here? I mean, it looks like a mushroom cloud. It was able to airplanes were way above the clouds, were able to look down and just see this massive plume of smoke.
And I'll add one more question to this, Frank. I'm just genuinely curious to what do we know about the damage this is causing? Because I'm hearing a lot of stories, animals getting poisoned, the Ohio River, getting poisoned. I'm using silly terms because I haven't researched this, by the way. Nick has done the work. And I've also heard about the amount of impacts having. About 3 million people were getting affected. Can you correct anything I got wrong or add on to it?
Yeah, so real quick, to Nick's question, did they wait too long? I can't answer that. What I can tell you is, if you think that picture of the mushroom cloud was bad, that's a controlled release where they were slowly draining the tankers in a controlled fashion. Option A was let it burn, and that would have built pressure in the tankers, and it all would have leaked at once. So the mushroom cloud would have been 10 times bigger, and every building, within an X thousands of feet radius would have been damaged or flattened. I was getting on Twitter really railing on this Sunday night, Monday. The evacuation zone, in my opinion, of 1 mile was silly. Should have been 4 or 5 because of some of the residual fallout, air quality, things like that. To Mario's questions, other things that we have, vinyl chloride's the one that got the attention. I was yelling about it as soon as I heard it was vinyl chloride. One of the fallout byproducts, a thermal byproduct, meaning a byproduct of vinyl chloride when you burn it. One of the byproducts was phosgene. Phosgene is a gas that's heavier than air. It's pretty easy to make. You take vinyl chloride, you heat it up, you get phosgene. They actually use that as a crude trench warfare gas in World War I because it's heavier than air. So if you're down in a 6-foot trench and you're, hiding from overhead bullets, if you flood that trench with vinyl chloride, it will stay in the trench. It won't leave the trench because it's heavier than air. It displaces air. So my primary concern when I heard the leak was happening, and of course the controlled demolition, my primary concern was phosgene as a byproduct. In the Ohio River area, the valley we call it, we have valleys and a lot of low-lying areas, and people's homes have basements in this part of the country. So you got a lot of folks that were potentially at risk with such a huge leak of this heavier than air byproduct. That was my primary concern.
Right.
Right. Secondary concern we have now is that's not the only stuff on the train. There was lube oils, vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, monobutyl ether, ethyl hexyl acrylate, isobutylene, and those are just some of the things that we know about. A lot of those are labeled as carcinogens. They have other bad side effects. After they did the controlled leak, the mushroom cloud, it was very, very dramatic. So it started to get traction in the news, which was really what I was pushing for, to protect the people of East Palestine, get them reimbursed and so forth. Vinyl chloride, its thermal breakdown turns into hydrochloric acid, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and this, deadly phosgene gas I talked about. So, secondary concern after the phosgene, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, not so much. Hydrochloric acid was the secondary concern. So now we've got a big acid cloud, which is that kind of fog that you see surrounding the mushroom cloud. Most likely that's hydrochloric acid going up into the atmosphere. And if you've ever heard of acid rain is what happens when you mix either sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid or whatever with rain. Of course, a few days later in Ohio, we had 30-mile-an-hour wind and a ton of rain come through. So, the good news and the bad news about that from a fallout standpoint, acid rain went north, acid rain went around the immediate area, acid rain went east, acid rain went south. And I was tweeting, hey, everybody, wash your cars, because if you like your gel coat, you're going to want to wash your car if you got acid rain on it. From a flora and fauna ecological standpoint, there's a lot of sensitivity to not just all these nasty chemicals, but also hydrochloric acid. So, frogs, fish, birds, especially, plants, there's a whole wildlife area in this part of the state. It's a beautiful part of the state. And, now we've got this carcinogenic and poison gas and hydrochloric acid, fallout cloud, which was unfortunate. Again, I was railing for people to get out of the 1 mile zone, get out of the 5 mile zone, because these are not things you necessarily want to be breathing, not just from a carcinogenic standpoint, but from an air quality standpoint. Hydrochloric acid vapors and acid rain will damage your lungs, and certainly not a good thing to do.
Right. So I want to add on just one point to something that you said earlier, just so people have facts and figures here. 5 million people use the Ohio River as their source of drinking water. That's first. Second off, 30 million people live in the Ohio River basin, which was one of the points that Frank was pointing out, that we're talking about a lot of valleys and everywhere where you're going to get water flowing through creeks and such, and so there are going to be a lot more people affected than just those people that rely solely on the Ohio for drinking water. And beyond that, I want to ask you a question, Frank, before I go to Millie. How long could we expect this vinyl chloride and other particles to remain in the air after this explosion?
So my understanding about the vinyl chloride is that in its natural state, it's a vapor, which means it wants to exist like steam, not in the liquid state. So we'll just call it unstable, meaning it wants to exist as a gas or a vapor. So the good news is that easily disperses with wind. Thursday last week in Ohio, we had 40-mile-an-hour winds at ground level. So up 500 feet in the atmosphere there, probably had 60 or 100-mile-an-hour winds. So the good news is from a disbursement standpoint, a lot of the pollution was frankly blown up to Youngstown, blown over to Pittsburgh, blown all over the place and dispersed. Plus the rain does a good job scrubbing things. I commented on my timeline, one of the ways we used to clean the flue gas from coal plants that used to be in the area was using water. You basically create rain in the smokestack, and that scrubs out the bad stuff. So the fact that we had wind and the fact that we had rain, most of that stuff's been washed away. Phosgene has a very very low, short half-life. It's about a day and a half in air, so that's no longer really a concern. That's gone. It's been gone for a while. Hydrochloric acid, acid rain hits the ground. It's going to do what it's going to do and get diluted, and that's that. My primary concern right now, it's not really the mushroom cloud. It's not really a lot of the things we've talked about so far. My concern right now is the water, okay? Because we had just the vinyl chloride alone, the estimates are something like 150,000 gallons. That's like a third of an Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of vinyl chloride alone. And then there was the lube oil and all the other stuff. And to paint a picture, the Ohio River, it flows from Pittsburgh all the way down to the Mississippi River. It's, half-mile wide, big giant river from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi River. Well, all the way at the northwest corner of that, just outside of Pittsburgh, is where this incident happened. And it happened 15 miles north of the Ohio River. Okay? So 15 miles north of the Ohio River, a trail derails. And a few days later, Weirton, West Virginia, which is on the Ohio River, on the West Virginia side, directly south of East Palestine by 15 miles, they detected butyl acrylate to high enough degrees that they decided not to use the Ohio River as their water supply. So they've actually turned off the pumps that pump fresh water out of the Ohio River to their water treatment plants. They turned that off and they went to well water, and they're actually now installing 3,700 feet of pipe to go to the Guyandotte River as an alternate source to the Ohio River. Okay, because they're concerned that stuff came from East Palestine. East Palestine. It's pronounced Steen, not Stein. Stuff came from East Palestine, 15 miles down through multiple creeks, and made its way into the Ohio River. So I'm concerned, if you can pick it up to a degree in Weirton, West Virginia, 15 miles away, if you're picking it up to such a degree where you're concerned enough not to use that as your water supply, I'm concerned for everything in that 15-mile stretch predominantly. Okay, downstream stuff in the Ohio River flows east to west. Once you get out of Pittsburgh, west of Pittsburgh, it starts flowing west and southwest towards the Mississippi River. So everything downstream of that, they're all monitoring to see what they're picking up. Louisville, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, all these bigger cities. At least for us, these bigger cities are monitoring their water, and they're keeping an eye on this. But I'm personally extremely concerned about the local area, East Palestine and south. Toronto, Ohio, all these small cities that are, flyover country for most folks. They've got creeks, and 15 miles, at least butyl acrylate made its way 15 miles south of that, and who knows what else. And these are beautiful areas. The Little Beaver Creek, which is
quick question. I'm just going to jump in. Quick question from the audience here. I'm just going, any audience members that have questions, bottom right corner, you can ask your questions. Any panelists that wants to speak, just put your hand up or just jump in. I'll ask. Go ahead, Grant, and I'll ask a question afterwards.
I got a question. So I mean, this is terrible, right? But a third of a swimming pool, I think that's what you said, diluted by how many, millions of gallon? I'm trying to be optimistic here. Like at what point does it dilute to where it's not a danger?
So to answer that question, the Ohio River is trillions of gallons. So 1/3 of a swimming pool into a trillion, not a big deal. The problem though is the creeks that go from East Palestine to the Ohio River. Get on Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever and check out those creeks. Some of those creeks are only like 5 feet wide at points. So now take that swimming pool. Again, that was a third of swimming pool of just vinyl chloride. Okay, we don't know how much lube oil, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, etc. We don't know much of that other stuff. So let's just call it one swimming pool worth of stuff. Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of stuff was leaked. Okay, whatever didn't burn off went on the ground. Whatever went on the ground probably found the storm sewers, and probably found these creeks. So you got a 5-foot wide creek like Leslie Run or Sulphur Run or Bull Creek. Some of these smaller creeks. That ecology is decimated, and at least in the short term. And
are they seeing life affected along the creeks and along the river yet?
I'm trying to get there later this week. Frankly, I'm busy. I've got a day job. There have been reports. There was lots of reports of dead fish turning up. I'm not exactly sure, which creeks it was. They all run.
We have a clip on that here shortly. So.
Yeah, so there's reports.
And we're most likely going up there to do a live space tomorrow. So That is the current plan. But yeah, I'm gonna play a clip from the local news that was going over this with some locals, based on the fact that there are a bunch of reports on fish going belly up in the creeks, just as Frank said. So.
After this couple saw dead fish in this creek that you're looking at, they're deciding to not take any chances.
Oh, there was hundreds.
Russell Murphy is referring to the fish now belly up in Leslie Run. He and his wife noticed them last night, barely 48 hours after the fiery derailment 5 miles away.
This is huge, huge environmental effects.
That's now one of many concerns the EPA now faces.
The impact of the fish, yes, there was a impact of those. However, the levels as we have seen it are protective to groundwater. We are aware there are some wells along that for residential wells.
Environmental cleanup crews were at and actually in that water today. So are these booms, which are used to catch and stop anything that shouldn't be flowing here.
So I'd like to go to Lisa on that one, or Liza, I'm sorry, and ask you here, when we're looking at fish that are dying in this water here, is it pretty safe to say that there is a huge hazard to humans as well?
I think that, first of all, I'm not an ecotoxicologist, so I'm not 100% sure, what kind of exposures the fish had. But if it turns out that it's hydrochloric acid because of the hydrogen chloride release, I wouldn't be surprised that fish would have that problem. I do think that the long-term health effects in terms of human beings is going to be relatively low, because the acute so there's a difference between acute toxicity and chronic toxicity. And so when people are talking about carcinogens like vinyl chloride and things like that, that's in a work setting where you are exposed to this chemical for many hours at a time for many days a week, as opposed to the acute exposure. If for example, if you get acute dermal exposure, you get a almost like frostbite, because this chemical is so volatile that you have to put it in a compartment that's heavily pressurized, make it liquid. And if that comes in contact with your skin, think of like liquid nitrogen when you're burning off warts. It's going to have a similar effect like that. But it's all, I think that the actual real danger in terms of human health problems came from the explosion and the potential trauma from explosion, rather than and then it burns off. So I don't think that there's going to be an increased risk of hepatic angiosarcomas, which you saw in 11 patients in 1973 that were chronically exposed to high levels of this stuff in an occupational setting. So it's important to differentiate acute toxicity from chronic toxicity, and the potential of having a problem with an acute exposure versus a chronic exposure. So what you may be seeing with the fish, and once again, I'm not an ecotoxicologist, I'm not doing the measuring of the chemicals of the hydrochloric acid or whatever in the water. Hydrogen chloride gets converted to hydrochloric acid when it comes into contact with water. So I wonder if that's maybe not why you're seeing dead fish. But I don't think that that's going to reflect a long-term problem with people.
Interesting. Matthias, I think you wanted to jump in real quick with some statements here.
Yeah, I've been following along looking for official statements from the local and federal level, and I have a few to share with you right now. But obviously, very important, the discussions that we're having on what people are seeing on the ground. Local media plays a key role in discovering that kind of information. So we just already spoke about the fish. There have been examples of someone on Fox 8 reporting that his foxes have been getting sick, some of which have died. We know that some chickens in an area 10 miles away died, and they're being investigated as to why that occurred as well. I want to show you, my thread is posted up in the Nest, but you guys can see there's a big statement that was put out to Norfolk Southern Railway from the Environmental Project Agency. They specify that they know that approximately 20 rail cars were carrying hazardous materials, and we discovered today that more hazardous materials than we originally knew about were found on board. Materials released during the incident were observed and detected in samples from several lakes. That's new information as well. But I want to read for you what we just heard from Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, because people have been calling out his silence. He just wrote on Twitter, "I continue to be concerned about the impacts of the February 3 train derailment near East Palestine, Ohio, and the effects on families in the 10 days since their lives were upended through no fault of their own." He continues to list the names of the boards and teams that he have sent down with the Department of Transportation to assist with the situation, and also linked the Environmental Protection Agency as a good source of information. We also just heard from PBS News a new exclusive interview with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, who told PBS, quote, "We continue to monitor the air, we continue to monitor the water. They continue to tell us, the EPA continues to tell us that it is in fact safe." Now, there is some false information going through as well, which has been stirring up a lot of controversy on social media and bringing this story to a new light. We want to clarify a few things. Number one, there was an arrest made on a journalist, part of the News Nation programming, and excuse me, I just got some breaking. Okay, we'll bring you that in a few minutes, but I apologize for the interruption. That arrest was made due to a disruption during the governor's press conference on one of the days following the train incident, and there's no reason to believe that it was any sort of cover-up situation. There's also
there's
reports on social media.
that's actually a good point. Like, I just got another one here. Journalist Evan Lambert, is that who you're talking about? Was harassed and detained by the Ohio authorities.
That is who I'm talking about.
When he was about to consult
Correct.
the governor about the serious situation of the derailed train that caused the chemical incident. So he's saying that this point here, it states that he was about to consult the governor. And I actually want to play a quick clip.
No, he was giving a live. He was doing a live shot for News Nation when the governor took the stage, and a trooper came over to him and asked him to be quiet.
But that's question. One thing, I'm waiting for the right time. Like, a lot of reports, a lot of people concerned, and I'll go to James afterwards after asking you this question. A lot of people concerned about the silencing of the media. I'll play a Fox clip. I haven't heard it yet, so I hope it's relevant. Let me play it now.
Story has been covered. If it's been covered at all, it's about how, there are poor people in East Palestine who have been victimized by this disaster. Well, of course that's true. But you want journalists asking tough questions about what's going on. You want to know, for example, vinyl chloride is actually acceptable in the water. I've been trying to get an answer to that question for days. I haven't been able to get an answer to it. Why is vinyl chloride showing up in the Ohio River in West Virginia and Cincinnati, hundreds of miles away from where this accident took place? There are a lot of questions, and we don't, unfortunately, have a media that's actually interested in asking those questions and answering them.
It's just crazy. All these people are like defacing paintings because they care about the earth. If you care about the earth, clean water is the first step. I appreciate. If you can't get an answer as a sitting U.S. senator from the state affected, that just tells you everything right there. Thank you, Senator.
We're working it, Tucker. Thank you.
Yes, a lot of concerns, a lot of attacks on the media, also a lot of reports of the media being silenced. Matthias, have you seen, is that the case?
That's what I'm trying to share with everyone, that at this point, we have no reason to believe that the media is purposefully avoiding or being silenced by the story. What we are seeing, though, to counter that is a lot of false information on social media, such as reports that the objects, which we covered extensively over the weekend, that were shot down by the United States is some sort of cover up by the government to suppress the story coming out of East Palestine. as well as other things like there's a big farming industry in Ohio, and people are starting to believe that this was done purposefully to destroy our farming infrastructure. All of that contributes to this story growing and metastasizing into something that it is not, while it is of concern. And we hear the concern in the voices of the officials and the agencies on the ground. At this point, while we do have reports of fatalities among animals and people reporting symptoms when they breathe in and things like that, which must be taken seriously and investigated, it's not at this point, as I saw being reported, a Chernobyl type event at this point.
Yeah, so we hopefully, if we do end up being on the ground tomorrow in East Palestine, I think we'll try to talk to some farmers and such that do have, because you have a lot of streams that are running through East Palestine, especially because it's not far from the Ohio River at all. So you naturally have a lot of streams flowing straight that way. And one of the concerns that I have personally heard about, possible livestock or other animals dying is because they're drinking water out of these creeks. So I think that's going to be telling at some point. And I don't personally know, but I know this was another concern as well, is eating food from animals that did drink this water. I know that's been a concern. I don't have any information behind that yet, but that's definitely a question we're going to ask. Before we go to Millie, I want to go to James and get your opinion on this.
Evening all from the UK. I mean, there's a number of different components to this that raise questions. Some really interesting insight. I think everyone needs to take a sharp and take a breath and assess what the situation is in the round. I think there is, yes, a lot of theories that are going out there, but far too early. But part of the reason these conspiracy theories in inverted commas happen is the lack of transparency by the authorities, whether it's through government, national government, local government authorities, and also media. This story has effectively been live by accident for pretty close to 2 weeks. And so therefore it's all come out over the last few days. And because there's been that hiatus period, that raises all these questions and people start going into different directions about what if and what's happened. And this must be the reason why. So it's not a surprise why all these theories happen, but there's a couple of concerns here. Firstly, the environmental damage and at what scale. And that will hopefully unearth itself over the next few days and weeks. And secondly, the lack of action by the US government on this to be on top of the story and also mainstream media being on top of the story rather than just local reports. So there's two concerns here. What is the spread of this and what's the risk to wildlife and also contamination for the population, not just locally, but possibly wider than that. But secondly, the lack of response from the US government on this. Now, I'm not buying into wider conspiracy theories, certainly at this stage, but we need to raise questions about why has this story effectively unearthed itself on a global basis, literally 10 days after the event.
James, you mentioned that the media coverage has been, missing a lot, and there's been a lot of criticism on that front. I'm just wondering what is your expectation here in terms of where's the media missing the most? Is it that it's late to the game? Is it not asking the right questions? Because there has been a lot of mainstream media coverage from Washington Post and Guardian and others, but what are they missing?
I think it's the hiatus. I mean, now the media's on top of it. The horse is bolted on the story eventually, but there's been that hiatus. And I think that largely is a responsibility of the US government. And, and then the media's come late to that as well. But it comes back to that point, the sense of irony that we're going through and looking at a sort of wider sense where we're told to turn off our gas stoves. But there's major environmental problems around the world, whether it's 3 billion masks in oceans, what's happening in America right now with this sort of toxic event, whether it's to do with the whales issue on the east coast of America, cobalt issues in, the plundering of cobalt with child slaves for electric cars. There's a number of these issues, major issues, that should be given more coverage. So we should be allowed to then debate them in the round. And going back to the issue with this particular story, yes, the media is reporting on it now, but why was the time lag? You know, the time lag of 10 days presents two problems. Firstly, well, why weren't the US government on top of this straight away? And secondly, that poses a risk to local communities. If there's not enough information getting out there about what is happening on this story, then people can't make their own assessments about whether their own environment is safe, not just in the surrounding area, but if it's spreading through water streams further afield.
Do you see that as a disconnect between the local community and the major media?
Yeah.
Because perhaps these communities are sort of underrepresented in the major media since they're not major markets?
Yeah, I completely agree. But fundamentally, the buck stops with the government. Because, you know, coming from a UK point of view, we've got our own problems with government in this country as well. But I doubt very much that there'd be a time lag of a week to 10 days, almost 2 weeks, on a major environmental story in the UK. And so that's the thing that's the most staggering event of all of this, is the fact that, you know, this is emerging almost minute by minute, you know, quite a bit after the actual event. And that for me, that gives concern about transparency from government, but also about safety, about surrounding communities. So, you know, you've got communities who are completely uncertain about their local environment because they're not getting enough information. It's only beginning to happen, probably far too late, a week to 10 days after the event.
Yeah, let me bring in Alex real quick here if we can. Alex, you have some experience in cleanup efforts that are similar to this one, maybe.
Yeah, so our family, this was about 30 years ago. We had a manufacturing plant. We manufactured cylinders for printing. They were coated with chrome. Therefore, we had chromium acid in our tanks. We did have one of the big major tanks break. We couldn't contain it. Chromium acid was leaking out. We made, there was no way to essentially stop it. So what we had to do was make an executive decision. We called every single aggregate logistics company that could deliver as much 100% crushed limestone type 2. And what we did is we had a 50,000 square foot building, and we had to basically build a wall 10 feet high around the perimeter of the property and just keep on. I think we loaded like 100,000 metric tons. And we had bulldozers piling it all up. We had geotextile put down, and we were able to contain that. So the thing is, I don't understand why they're allowing all these chemicals. You know, this can be contained, and there should be a massive deployment. And, you know, you can go to all the local quarries, you bring in that 100% crushed limestone type 2, you surround it, first you excavate, you lay down geotextile, and you just keep on piling it around, and you build a perimeter and as high as you possibly can, and you prevent the environment from getting destroyed. And I just don't understand what the hell they're doing.
Next, Alex, Alex, I just want to quickly, if you don't mind, Alex, I know Tammy's getting late for you and you've got interviews shortly. We'll go to you in a bit, Alex. Tammy, just about what you've sent us via DMs. I would love you to give us an overview. And I won't paraphrase what you sent us. I'll just give you the mic and you can explain it to the audience.
Yes, this is Tammy Burdick. Is it okay to speak briefly?
It is, yeah, the mic is yours.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope all of you are doing well. I'm so sorry for anyone that might be directly impacted by this. I'm in Ohio. I'm actually in Cincinnati. And I'm actually a survivor of an environmental illness from contaminated water. So unfortunately, I'm obviously very scared of, you know, the risks. I never wanted to go through another environmental illness again. But though my situation wasn't necessarily directly towards chemicals, it was an environmental bacteria that somehow managed to find its way into the public water. And I wasn't in Ohio actually at the time. I was in the state of Connecticut. But my journey led me to becoming known as the diagnosis detective with the book Diagnosis Detective Curing Granulomatous Mastitis on Amazon. It's a pretty crazy story. Doctors dismissed me at first. They didn't know what was going on with me. And kind of like Aaron Brockovich Jr., I traced my steps. And I even had the water at my own home tested. It was negative, and that's what led me back to a business trip that I had taken. And there was another professional on that same business trip, same hotel at the same time, that contracted an infection through his ankle the same way that I had contracted it through my breast. So that's a little bit about my story. I'm kind of, very, very intrigued and interested in anything environmental, whether it be PFAS or whether it be pesticides. I'm on it, and I want to avoid it as much as humanly possible. So, I mean, here in Cincinnati, even in January of 2020, the Cincinnati Enquirer had reported apparently this was some new laboratory testing they were doing and found that PFAS were in the Ohio River. So it's like, here we are, several years later, and I wonder, have they been doing anything about that? I mean, if they've been detected, what are you doing about it? And now we also have the risk potentially of these chemicals from this derailment making its way here. And it's like almost to the point where I'm looking at it like we're all doomed. I mean, it's no wonder there's so many sicknesses and illnesses and cancers in this country, and those numbers continue to climb.
Tammy, you are in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is
I am.
right downstream. We're not talking too far at all. And there've actually been reports already that, this is coming straight down towards you, down the Ohio River. How long did it take for you to end up having having your diagnosis after you were exposed to this contaminated water? I mean, are we talking years and years?
I was diagnosed with granulomatous mastitis, and then it was 7 months later before I found a gene sequencing pathology test that would identify this environmentally associated bacteria called Corynebacterium croppenstedii. And it has an origin of water, sewer, and soil. So with that information, I was there able to be like, okay, I haven't personally come in contact with soil. I'm not a teenage, ninja mutant turtle or whatever they are playing in the sewers. I'm like, the only other possibility here would be water. So where did I get it? I hadn't been in any oceans. I hadn't been in ponds or pools or spas or anything for months prior to my diagnosis, except I did go on that business trip, and obviously I take a shower each and every single day just about here in Cincinnati. And that test gave us that bacteria, which had me trace my steps. I had my water tested, and that's when we traced it back to Connecticut.
So, Aaron, I do want you to jump in on that because you are a medical doctor.
I just want to interrupt it for a second before you move on to the next speaker. The breaking news story that I was tracking before has developed a little further, and I think it warrants alerting you guys on what we're dealing with. There are reports right now on Michigan State University campus of an active shooter situation near Berkey Hall on the East Lansing campus. We have scanner reports indicate that there have been multiple victims. We'll continue to keep you guys posted, but we're going to resume for now our reporting on the situation in East Palestine.
Yeah, Matthias, let me ask you real quick. Do we know that if there are any fatalities yet?
I'm not going to speculate. There are reports on Twitter via numerous sources that there may potentially be fatalities as a result of this incident, but numbers and figures I'm not going to speculate or go into at this point.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, well, Dr. Aaron dropped down, so I guess I'll jump over real quick.
I'll bring him up for you.
Okay, good. Millie, definitely, I want to get to the topic. Millie on trains. This is going to be very important here shortly, so I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Yeah, and by the way, Aaron is back up. If you want to go to Aaron or Millie first, up to you, Nick.
Perfect. I'm going to go to Aaron first. Aaron, you've been listening to obviously one of the biggest concerns about this entire thing are the medical ramifications for having such a toxic substance lingering in the air, toxic water supplies and such. How long would you expect it to take before we actually start seeing issues from some of this toxicity? Obviously, I would say that water would be the worst possible thing, right? Contaminated water.
Yeah, Nick, if I could just comment on that a little bit, probably what you would see if there's contaminated water is gradually developing chronic problems in a given population, probably a regional population. So if you have a tributary, if you have a particular stream that has a high concentration of a toxic chemical, you're going to get very micro doses of that toxic chemical in the water for a period of months to years. And this is where these things can be really difficult to establish causation, because you get a few cases in individuals who are especially vulnerable, either because of genetics or because of co-occurring medical conditions, and they develop a problem. And assuming that the problem is an unusual problem, that may raise a red flag. If there's a very, very rare form of cancer that crops up in a small town among 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, that may raise a red flag, and that may result in the kind of careful investigation that you need to establish some kind of environmental toxicity. But there are other situations in which the toxin can cause chronic problems that can mirror other chronic problems in the population. And the fact that this small town has a higher than expected incidence of heart disease or respiratory problems or dermatologic problems or whatever it might be may go entirely unnoticed, both because those things may develop slowly over a period of months to years after the initial event that creates that toxic problem in the environment, or because the problems that it produces are run-of-the-mill medical problems that local, frontline physicians, or, insofar as they're paying attention, a local, say, county public health authority may not even notice. So very often people who try to advocate, the previous speaker mentioned Erin Brockovich. I'm curious as to her personal experience trying to advocate for people that have been impacted by these. Very often you have an uphill battle because you have a burden of proof, or at least the authorities tell you the burden of proof is on you to establish that, this thing that, the big agricultural company, Monsanto or whatever, is doing to the soil or to the water is causing your problem. And that kind of clear relationship between a complex medical problem that usually has multiple causes and an environmental toxin can be really hard to establish. So I'm just wondering, as a question to that speaker, about her experience kind of dealing with this issue as a victim of a toxin, and also as an advocate trying to bring attention to these kinds of problems, because it can be really, really tough.
Tammy?
You're muted, Tammy.
Yes. Yes. So first I want to actually touch on the testing component. I don't know if many of you are familiar with functional medicine, but my surgical breast oncologist and I actually incorporated a functional medicine practitioner into the 3 of us, which I called the A team during my journey. In functional medicine, there are a multitude of very specific, almost DNA level types of tests that can be done that you will never see in conventional medicine. When you all get off of this tonight, Google a stool analysis test called a GI map. I did one of those and it told me 4 pages of information about the health of my microbiome. There are diagnostic labs out there that will actually take your urine and look for chemical byproducts. Just to give you a truthful, legitimate example, I will use myself. My functional medicine practitioner did a test on me, and that test resulted high levels of xylene byproduct in my urine. And he asked me, do you have any idea where you're getting this exposure? And I'm like, no. And the most common product that this chemical tends to be in is petroleum-based products like gasoline. He asked me, he's like, are you hanging around at gas stops? And I'm like, absolutely not. No, I'm not doing that. And he's like, well, I don't know where you're getting this. So of course I start doing my own research and come across underground storage tanks. And I'm like, okay, is something like that even possible here? Like, I'm not an environmental expert. I actually called an environmental attorney. They're giving me some tips, information. They're like, go to Google, start searching for underground storage tanks. And I actually came across this like company that was some petroleum affiliation. It was close to where I live. And I'm like, okay, is there some sort of connection here? Is there some underground storage tanks I don't know of? I never found out really where the connection was, but there's runoff all the time from, different types of chemicals and pesticides, and things can get in groundwater. And, who's to say what we're getting exposed to nowadays? I mean, I'm living proof that almost anything's possible. But with your question prior, could you be a little more specific as to what you're kind of wanting from me? If you could be a little more direct, I guess.
Oh yeah,
that might help
so
me best answer your question.
very often people that have these kinds of exposures and believe that their medical problem is attributed to some sort of environmental toxin, when they try to get some sort of acknowledgement of that or compensation for that from the company or the entity responsible or from the government, they can meet a lot of resistance in terms of, prove to us that your problem is due to this issue. Mostly because there's usually a financial interest or maybe even a political interest in not acknowledging or not addressing the issue. They want to manage their risk. They want to prevent lawsuits. They want to prevent having to make a public apology and maybe compensate other victims of the problem. So yeah, I don't know to what extent you have or have not tried to pursue compensation or acknowledgement from public or private entities, corporations, or the government that may be responsible for these toxins. But in my experience, when patients try to do that, very often it's an uphill battle. So my question was really whether you had any personal experience.
Aaron, I'm just going to jump in.
She
she seems to have dropped, Aaron. While we try to bring her back up, Millie, I know that Nick has been trying to ask you a question as well. Nick, do you want to go to Millie?
Sure, Millie. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns here that we've seen today, especially, because there's been a lot of people on social media being extra vocal today and yesterday and recently about how was this handled? Was it handled right by? I believe it was Norfolk Southern, who was the operator of the train. And your father worked as a regional manager at a rail company for decades, and you said that his take was, quote, whenever the decision is made to burn, it's always a last resort. Always first and foremost is to contain the chemical. So your father, who was a regional manager at this rail company, how does he think that this should have been handled based on what we know so
I've just
far?
got, before you answer, Millie, I've just got some updates from Rose Alerts, Millie, just quickly, sorry, and I'll give you the mic. Breaking news about the shooting. Here's what we know so far on the MSU shooting. Several 911 callers reported an active shooter at Berkeley Hall Academic Building. At least 6 people were shot with fatalities. Reported gunman now inside the student union, and he's not yet in custody. We've got another person that's tweeted that replied, my father-in-law is at the ER with his friends and just told my wife they've brought in over 10 victims so far from the shooting. So we'll keep you all updated. That's from Rose Alerts that tweeted this. Millie, sorry to interrupt. The mic is yours.
All right. Well, I'm going to interrupt one more time to just remind everybody to put your questions and comments down in the bottom right-hand corner. We're going to be going for a while, and I know you guys have a lot of questions because I've gotten hundreds of them personally today from you guys. So put them down there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Millie, jump in.
Sure. So, my father, like you were saying, he worked in the railroad as a regional manager for a long time, and it wasn't this particular rail company, but it was a very well-known named company, which he asked me not to actually mention. So, but what he actually interviewed with me earlier today, and he really gave me a lot of really good information. So aside from just the tweets that I put out, he basically said that what happens when you get a car in a derailment and the pressure release valve doesn't work, the pressure inside the tank is heated from the fire outside the tank, and it heats the flammable gas on the inside to the point where the rail car will no longer be able to hold the chemicals, and it literally explodes. And it creates a huge explosion, which actually flattens out square mile radius, and it can harm a lot of people. So that's most likely why you saw those evacuation orders coming out and trying to get people away from that area, because it could have actually exploded and caused a lot of death and damage. So that's actually what's called a BLEVE. So if you actually were to look up videos on the internet, like look it up on YouTube, you can actually see BLEVEs and see what could have possibly happened. And that's probably the worst thing or scenario that you can have if you have a flammable car with a failed safety release device. So if you have that, you either have to get rid of the pressure, which is what they did by doing like a controlled device to kind of puncture holes in it, or get rid of the flame. And it doesn't look like they were actually going to be able to put the flame down. So,
Do you believe that one of the largest issues here was the fact? Another quote from your father, actually. They are supposed to spread out the hazardous cars just in case something like this happens. Do you by chance know, did they have these cars grouped together? Because I do believe we have the manifest, and it seems as if there were several of them that were stacked together.
Right.
With
So
vinyl chloride, to be clear. So.
I actually sent him the manifest because he said really, he knows that you're supposed to have spacing between the cars, and you actually have to have certain buffers. And so until he saw the manifest, he couldn't really say, but I actually sent him the manifest. And after he looked at the manifest, he did say that everything looked like they were on top of it, and that basically you can't have any hazardous chemical cars right next to the locomotive or caboose, which it looks like they didn't have that. Basically, you can't have a whole lot of them together. You have to kind of mix and match with other cars. And that, that's why they had like semolina, which is flour, and plastic pellets, and other kind of non-hazardous, or those those petrol oils and whatnot. So some of those were or petroleum oils, sorry, they were non-toxic. So he said, just by judging and looking at the manifest, that it looks like everything was done by the book. He said it's just unfortunate because when you have a situation where a train derails and all of those tanks and cars just kind of get mixed and matched and piled on each other, a lot of that effort to kind of keep the spacing and make it safer goes out the window, and a lot of people have been pointing out the hazard with the vinyl chloride, which is a hazard, which it's more of a gas situation, right? But one of the things he pointed out that he thought was actually a really big deal was the ethylene glycol. According to the report, because he looked at it, he said that it lost its load. So a normal tank car is about 12 to 15,000 gallons. So that's like a ton of ethyl glycol being spilled into the water and into the ground. And he said that ethyl glycol is known, it's carcinogenic, and it's known to kill animals. And it's really harmful for the environment because it's a liquid essentially. So that could be what's causing a lot of the dead fish. Actually, it could also just be the ethyl glycol. So he said to look out for that because you might want to be testing the water as well for the ethyl glycol.
Got it. Yeah. And speaking about that manifest, which does tell you what cars and what kind of chemicals, and I believe the class of chemicals as well, whether or not they're flammable or hazmat or such.
I've seen people call it the Chernobyl of the U.S. That's way too
Yes.
big of an exaggeration, or am I mistaken here?
See,
an
that's
exaggeration.
something that we're trying to it's something we're trying to figure out here, because depending on, there are a lot
I
of
mean, it's
claims that
bad.
we're
It's
seeing.
bad, but I mean, Chernobyl was a whole different magnitude. It's
Sure, yeah.
radiation is
But
something
is
that
there?
lasts for years and years and years.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I'm actually an Ohio resident as well, and I live like only like about 30 miles away from East Palestine. So I am concerned about the water. I'm going to be testing my well, because you can go do that with your local like water district and city. They'll allow you to for free test your water. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be asking a bunch of my neighbors as well to test their wells for these different chemicals.
Yeah, do that, Millie, and update us on the results. And also, like before going to All Source, Ryan, Frank, and Walk Societies who've been waiting for a while. Greg, just very briefly, you're a resident. I would love to hear your story. There's a lot of theories floating around on the response by the authorities. Would love to get the facts on the ground, Greg. Appreciate you coming on.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Greg Bolden from America Out Loud. Maybe someone got lost in translation. I'm not a resident. I called residents today because I wanted to get their stories for my show tomorrow. And what I discovered is a lot of stories of people that are experiencing headaches, fluid in lungs, eyes burning when they're returning back to their homes. Spoke with someone at the Serum Fab plant, which is located exactly where it was derailed. They reopened today. Several of their employees had to go back home because they were not feeling well. So I got some recorded interviews with them. I also got confirmed reports of birds that were found dead on the ground, birds that have disappeared from the ecosystem, dead animals. I did hear that there are now fish that are swimming again in the waterways, but I heard something earlier that I just want to kind of correct about the Ohio River. So I ended up calling Negley, which is the town just downstream from where the accident happened. And Negley is seeing where the fish are dead. And so that is really matches the story of this going down to the Ohio River. And West Virginia, see where this is located, if people are not geographically kind of like locked in, West Virginia is only about 8 miles south of where the site was. Getting down into the Ohio River is not that difficult. And it was really a stone's throw away from the Pennsylvania border, which means people on the western part of that border that are located around Route 51, I was unaware, but they closed the roads. So people had not been able to get to work. And the most shocking thing that I was told is homes are going up for sale already, that people are trying to get out of the neighborhoods. So we have some major health impacts that are going on right now. These stories are not being told, so I'm going to try to tell them on my show the best I can. I appreciate you guys.
Why aren't they being? Have you faced any efforts of censorship whatsoever?
So no, and I heard that the reporter that did face censorship was not censorship whatsoever. Here's what I'll tell you. I've contacted the mayor's office. I've contacted the EPA. I've received nothing. I've even contacted the people that test the water at City Council. I've received no information back from any of them, and they've guaranteed a 24-hour response. The residents are all very willing to speak to me. It sounds to me less like there's a censorship of media and more like no one wants to speak out of turn and give misinformation because it's a horrible situation and no one has any good answers.
So do you believe, Greg, that there could possibly be a greater cover-up here? Obviously, that is one of the theories that have that's been floating around Twitter, especially today.
I don't see any facts to this. We've had a few panelists, and I'd love Walk Societies to kind of comment after Greg on whether he's seen any cover-up whatsoever. But go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so I actually called out Marjorie Taylor Greene on my show for tomorrow that I do not see a big cover-up. I've been going through this. The only thing that I could tie to it, and this is me speculating, which I don't like to do from a journalism standpoint, but the only thing I could speculate is you have Biden who forced an agreement towards railroad workers and Pete Buttigieg, same thing. And they work together. And so is it the conditions of the railways? Were there steps that were missed? Is that the reason why Norfolk Southern didn't have a sensor working 20 miles away when this thing came through Salem on fire? The one thing that I can tell you, there's not a big cover up, I don't believe, but one of the sensors from Norfolk Southern was definitely not working, which could have prevented this entire situation. So you're going to see class action lawsuits. You're going to see a major, major legal problem for them coming down into the future.
Before we go to woke societies, Millie, can you shoot me a DM real quick? Woke societies, go ahead, jump in.
Hey guys, you hear me?
Yeah, man.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thanks for inviting me here, guys. It's my first one, so I appreciate it. For anyone that might not know me, I'm a live streamer. I've been doing this for 6 years. I do digs. I write threads, as you guys can see today, and all that. I just wanted to bring up the fact that kind of what our UK Patriot guy was saying about the mistrust in the media. The only reason why I decided to even write this thread or even cover any of this in the first place, I didn't really think it was a big story last week, and I didn't really hear too much about it. And one of my listeners, this train where it derailed was literally in his backyard. He was maybe 60 feet from it, and he saw the entire thing. He sent me DMs of it. He was talking to the officials about it, since obviously it was right in his backyard. But I got countless DMs from people that live right in that town, and a lot of them, if they didn't hear too much from the media on it, and even people maybe 30, 40 miles away, they said the only reason they found out about this was through social media and threads and content creators. There wasn't really any kind of coverage of this at all. And it was days after the fact that they realized this. And some of them even found out just yesterday or today. And there are families that are concerned. They have, kids, all that. And, with the current situation that everything happened with COVID, the mistrust with media right now is at an all-time low. I don't think this is necessarily a cover-up, but the lack of transparency, or the quickness of a response. And I don't think you're going to have a good response in any kind of situation like this, but it seemed to be that no one wanted to give any kind of answer, and that kind of spurs on people thinking, is there anything else really happening here? So I was notified of this. I wasn't even going to report about this. I had people asking me to dig into this because they weren't getting answers from anyone. And these are people that live in and around these places. And to me, that was very concerning to me. And I got people telling me they have rashes now. They're having breathing problems. Their eyes are burning, kind of what the last speaker was just saying. It lines up with what he was saying as well. And, the dead animals, I've gotten pictures of all that. All that's happening. And my biggest problem with all this is that the EPA, from what I've researched, they gave a response and said that these creeks weren't affected. The water wasn't affected. And as far as I know, the original tests were only given for air and not ground and water. And then these residents were given the okay to come back. And then their answer changed as far as what other chemicals besides that vinyl chloride. And they were given all kinds of different answers after that. So the mistrust, from what I understand from the people that are actually on the ground that live there, is at an all-time high. And I know someone said, there's a bunch of conspiracies going around about that guy that got arrested, the journalist. I've watched the full body cam footage. I watched every angle of that. From what I understand, and from people that were there, that the governor was not speaking. And that journalist got taken out for, I don't know what reason. I don't know. But as far as, them saying he was interrupting anything, there was no interruption from anything that I could see, and from people that were there that I know. So I don't know that. And this is also this is kind of throwing fuel in the fire.
Yeah. So Frank, do you know anything more about this journalist that was arrested, and why?
Two things. First, to the journalist, I watched the governor's press conference in real time, and during his speech, you could tell there was some commotion in the back. You could tell his attention was distracted while he was looking at the camera, and then later it came out that a reporter was actually arrested. Later in the press conference, it actually came out that a reporter was arrested, and they asked the governor about it. He said he was unaware why, and then I believe he invited that reporter to do a one-on-one exclusive interview with the governor. So, I don't think there's any cover-up from that standpoint. I've had my hand raised for a while because I just have two final points, and one of them goes to Woke Society's comments a second ago. Water quality and the EPA and cover-ups. Again, I don't think there's a cover-up, but I have a major problem with the fact that the EPA's reports of surface water quality tests, the last report, that's issued on their website, and I've got all the links in my timeline I can share. The last reports are from February 4th. That was before they blew the train in a controlled demolition. Okay, that was a day after it crashed. That's the water quality report that they have published on their website right now. That's it. That's all the data we have. So you're talking 9 days later. They haven't provided a single update. Now, if you look at the air quality, they had air quality before the controlled. They had air quality during the controlled demolition. They had air quality after. Okay, and you could see a spike in pollution temporarily, and then it decreased back to normal levels. Everything's okay from an air standpoint. Why the heck? And I would encourage everybody, put all the pressure on it that you can. Why the heck hasn't the EPA in 9 days updated the water quality reports? And then my last final closing comment, because I got to go. Indemnification. Anybody that's from this area, and again, I tweeted this. I want to shout out to Cernovich because he retweeted this. Anyone that's in this area, if you're getting financially compensated or reimbursed for being displaced, if you're getting reimbursed from Norfolk Southern, do not sign any release. Do not sign or cash a check that has a memo line that says, by cashing this check, I am, waiving all rights, future rights to sue. There's a lot of concerns out there. There's a lot of carcinogens in the area. Last thing I want anybody to do is give up their future rights and indemnify these people who allowed this, tragedy to happen in their backyard. So again, put pressure on the EPA. We need updates. The last update they've provided is from February 4th, 9 days ago, going on 10 tomorrow. Okay. And do not waive your rights. That's all I got. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Frank. Danish, I want to go to you, Dr. Danish, before going to all source. From what you've heard so far, I know you've been keeping track of the situation. How serious is this? And is it more serious than they're making it out to be? Is there some sort of cover up, or are we over exaggerating? Dr. Danish, can you hear me? You're muted. I'll DM him to unmute all source. You there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, mic is yours, man, while I DM Dr. Danish.
Yeah, so no, I think about the media, I think one of the things that we kind of forget when we're discussing about this, right? Because when this first incident happened, I remember it kind of blew up on Twitter because the governor of Ohio, DeWine, he did institute a mandatory evacuation. But what happened was, and I think we're all kind of guilty of this, is that all our intention and focus went to the Chinese spy balloon incident because it happened concurrently. And so from a national media all the way down, that became the main focus. And I think this is an issue of attention span, right? Or what is the priority? And I think there's a legitimate criticism saying, okay, what is a greater threat? Do we have people in Ohio that are, hundreds, if not thousands of people that be severely affected because of health, economic reasons, mandatory evacuations, et cetera, over to the spy balloon? But I think we all have to kind of do some self-criticism, because I think we're all kind of guilty of this, is that once the spy balloon incident kind of broke, any other story, especially domestically, about it kind of just took a second step, but it went way down in the priority list, and everything went there. Because before the Chinese spy balloon incident happened and became public knowledge, there was a lot of reporting on this, but what it was centered on was the mandatory evacuation, right? Because of the health concerns that were affected, and then also because of the controlled demolition, or the concern of the explosion, the damage it can do to the local population in the area there. But then again, all the oxygen that we have kind of got sucked away from this. I do agree with Frank. I think there should be a lot more on the EPA. There has been some statements from a lot of consistent statements, at least from the local level, and then a lot of the EPA obviously is going to be slow in their response. Into Shizo, I know he's here, and I think he's trying to come up to speaker as well. He DM'd me about this. Is that the EPA has to wait until the area is secure and safe before they could do a lot of safe testing. But now that there's been a controlled demolition, why hasn't the EPA done a lot of these studies? And I think it's a legitimate question to ask this, to make sure that the people in the area are taken care of.
Mic is not working. Okay, I'm back. Dr. Danish, is your mic working yet before I go to Intel Schizo? Okay, still having issues. Matthias, what's the update?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that we've heard from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She just posted a few minutes ago that she's been briefed on the situation on MSU campus. The Michigan State Police, along with MSU police, local law enforcement, and first responders are on the ground. We're also seeing reports from the police. This is a verified source, but again, during these confusing times, we can't verify independent reports. So the police there are reporting a second shooting at a second location. However, a lot of times during these situations, people report things, whether it's echoes or police response or things like that. But we just wanted to let you know that official police sources are responding to reports of a second shooting.
And do we have any number on the fatalities yet?
No number as of now.
I appreciate it, man. Let me see if Dr. Dinish's mic is working. Dr. Dinish, can you hear me? All right, so I'll go Intel Schizo. Anything else to add? I know that you were in communication with all source. Anything else to add to the story before I go to Joanna?
In terms of the response, I think it was James. If it wasn't James that asked the question, apologies. So the earlier question about like the response and the lack of communication. So the railroad, unlike other industries, is notorious for its lack of transparency when things happen. And the reason for that is the railroad's fairly independent from government for the most part. And when they do have a derailment, their big thing is shut up, don't say anything. We got like 6 different investigations. Everything we say, there's going to be like a whole team of lawyers. Got to make sure everything's framed properly and make sure that we have as little liability on top of the derailment as possible. And in terms of the communications, there's actually been a lot of updates coming out of the EPA. You also have, they have a hotline at Norfolk Southern, along with the public affairs officer. It's just not one of those things where they're going to like call a press conference and, you know, get all the news agencies. They just kind of quietly do their thing. There's also a bunch of investigations. So you have the National Surface Transportation Board, the Ohio EPA, the federal EPA, internal investigation of Norfolk Southern. I'm sure the Pete Buttigieg and the feds probably have their own investigation as well. Each one of those guys are putting out their own statements. But it is hard to find those updates.
Can you tell me this? I'm going to read out a message from someone who's the vice president of quality control for a rail car manufacturer. And he says the following: important to note that this mess wasn't caused by a derailment. Tank cars are made to survive derailment by specific engineering. I'm a former VP of quality for a rail car manufacturer. The fire was caused by them trying to clear it without thinking of the consequences. Have you seen any other similar reports?
I've seen it two things. There was a security camera video about 20 miles, outside of East Palestine, of the train as it was going across that section of track that was visible from this warehouse. And you could see in the video a burning axle on one of the rail cars. And there was another update, which I did post about in regards to the axle. Investigators are now examining what happened when the train with an axle on fire passed through a detector in Salem. So what makes that interesting is these detectors the railroads have every once in a while, a detector that as the train goes over, that detector is sensing for things like fire or debris or anything that's pretty much making the train a hazard. And when the train goes over that, it does a readout to the crew saying, total train length, 10,000 feet, no issues found. Or if there was an issue, like let's say a car just randomly went missing, it would say, total train length, 9,000 feet, fire near axle 250. And the rail crew is supposed to acknowledge whatever that readout is to dispatch. So something I haven't seen that would definitely be a good question to ask, perhaps the Norfolk Southern or the feds is, where's that dispatch audio log? Because it leads to two things.
I just want to jump in quickly to Ryan, and before we go to Liza, Joanna, and Dr. Dinish, just for kind of a final summary on the health impact of this and the repercussions over the next few weeks. Because I think this is for me the most important story. Then what caused it? Is there censorship? Is there something behind? Is there something nefarious? Because those matter less than the impact that we will see on the environment and on people's health. Ryan, you sent us a message. Good to have you back on stage. Comparing this to a similar event in 2012, would love to know more about this comparison and your thoughts on what's going on.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. I am a former emergency manager, and I've actually dealt with train derailments and hazardous material leaks And I will tell you that train cars in themselves are designed in a manner in which, if they derail, to ensure that, you know, safety of the public and the people is of foremost concern, right? But in 2012, it's important to note that the NTSB prepared a report, a 90-page report. We had a very similar incident that occurred in which this vinyl chloride had leaked out in New Jersey in the Manitoua Creek. It was a derailment due to a bridge failure, or they turned the turntable. So a whole bunch of trains went with this chemical went into the Manitoua Creek in New Jersey. And I find it interesting, out of the 90-page report, as I was reading and poring over this from my previous experience, they only had 4 sentences as relates to the vinyl chloride environmental information and its impact. And I'll read them to you. Vinyl chloride is believed to be almost non-toxic to aquatic organisms on an acute basis. It readily degrades under aerobic conditions and may degrade under anaerobic conditions. If released into the air, it will remain in a gas phase. If the atmospheric half-life is estimated to be 23 hours, if released to soil, volatilization will occur, but the material does not volatilize, may be highly mobile. If released to water, evaporation will occur. So out of a 90-page report on the environmental impact of this material, and it was only 20,000 gallons at that time, and I realized we're dealing with a different significant impact. That's the only environmental impact that they came up with this. And they did a deep analysis into the harms of the human population. And they talk about tracking people that were harmed, up to almost, I believe, 40 to 50 people that had showed up at the hospital with some type of symptoms, but they really didn't seek to understand the environmental consequences of this type of release in 2012 out of a 90-page NHSTB report. So with this, I do agree also with their immediate response, because this particular chemical, and it's highly volatile. You got to understand, its BLEVE point, boiling liquid explosion vapor point, is like 7.8 degrees Fahrenheit, which means it's going to boil. And if there's damage to the container, and a BLEVE is where they're talking about, oh, this is the next Chernobyl. Well, when you have something like that many cars that rupture and blow, you're talking a massive bomb in that town. So a controlled burn of that may have been the most appropriate in this response. I don't have the specific facts, but it could have been, because that's what these cars are designed to do in those particular situations and circumstances, to release it. And to just release it without that, well, at 7.8 degrees, we all know it's cold right now. It could have been explosive when touched by air. That's another important point when you read the MSDS and you read the emergency response guide for this particular substance. So what I don't like about this that we have going on right now is we have a very comprehensive report on how to handle this, and it specifically highlights the government's failure of communication with the community and responsive efforts to that. And now we're seeing this again, in today, and we see the same problems that we're all seeing and feeling. And it's kind of like a repetitive thing. We're supposed to learn from our past mistakes, and we clearly have not learned from that. We're not educating, we're not updating people, we're not showing them what the consequences are. That's the point of after action reviews. That's the point of these reports. And Obama was president then, and this was his departments at the time. And guess what? Joe Biden was vice president. And here we now have a federal government that isn't responding again to a situation that was a significant impact to a major metropolitan populous area. And it's silence, and they're not responding appropriately, and they're not giving the public the tools that they need to make informed decisions themselves. That's what's most important at this point in the game. Maybe it's not toxic, I don't know, but they clearly didn't study it in 2012. I'll post, and I think I sent you the link, Mario. I think everybody should take an opportunity to read this and do a deep dive and analysis to what we've already learned.
Dinesh, I think it's the perfect time to go to you now, Dr. Dinesh.
Yeah.
On what you've heard from
So
go ahead.
I can give a little bit of context. And sorry, I had to step away earlier. But as we as it may have already been mentioned, being that vinyl chloride, which I know that is not the only chemical involved, but it is a chemical of note. Being that it is a halogenated hydrocarbon and that it is heavier than air, number one, we know that not only is inhalation the primary exposure route, but that children are actually more vulnerable. So you were asking about the health impact. I think we're going to have to keep an eye on that specifically, which is that children are actually more vulnerable since they're closer to the ground. Additionally, we also know that in the acute period, which is what we are in right now, central nervous system and respiratory issues are much much more common as a short-term impact. I know people have mentioned about the carcinogenic impact, and I'll give my actual thoughts outside of just like the medical side of things. But the thing that actually people aren't talking about, maybe you guys did bring it up, is that it also not predisposes, but increases prevalence of arrhythmias. And maybe Lisa or other Mike can speak a little bit more about that. And the challenge, the thing that is unreal, that I think when we talk about failure of the public health infrastructure, this one part is absolutely insane to me, which is, and that's what I kind of reached out to the team about, which is evacuation of a 1 mile radius or even a 2 mile radius is absolutely unheard of. So, I've spoken to several contacts, and everybody is sort of up in arms saying, what is going on over here? Why are we only evacuating such a small radius, considering it was close to the Ohio River Basin? I mean, it's
Why do you
unreal.
think,
And
Doctor? Why do you think that is? Because we've had two other panelists mention the same thing earlier in the space.
I think ultimately they're trying to, this is an opinion, no evidence behind it, but I think this is a failure of the public health infrastructure and the politicization of that infrastructure from a government that is heavily lobbied by Norfolk Southern. I mean, it's pretty well established, and I think that this is where we
But
lose
then why?
again.
But Dr. Dinesh, why would Norfolk not want to avoid a worse outcome, health impact?
So,
Like
that's
if
completely fair.
if it's just a 1 mile radius, more people will be impacted, and long term they'll be
Because the most common side effect of this could be completely swept under the rug. If you if you end up living there and you get cancer 15 years later, it's really hard for anyone to prove that it was actually related to that sentinel event. And I think that is what makes this the worst, because we know that the incidence of acute toxicity is actually very low, even at these. I know that 1 part per million is about, at least from what I studied, 1 part per million. I looked at this up today, that it can be hazardous at 1 part per million. But in terms of acute toxicity, you need to have a significant exposure. Whereas for the carcinogenic toxicity, you don't have to have as much of an exposure. And so, how do you link causality to something that occurred 20 years ago? That Americans get cancer all the time. And obviously this leads to specific very rare cancers, but still I think it would be hard pressed for anybody to be able to tie it directly. And Norfolk Southern knows that these poor people, which, by the way, this exact community, if you guys Google it, you will see that this exact community is one of the most hardest hit by the opioid crisis. This exact community has been hurt by corporate America left and right. And so I'm just telling you guys that one thing that is absolutely unreal about this is that this evacuation and return is completely outside of the bounds of normal public health. Think about how much we thought about everything associated with the pandemic, and then look at this response.
Doctor, just for the audience,
Dr. Dinesh, I just real quick here, they're getting that 1 mile evacuation radius from the emergency response guidebook that's published, and it specifically states a fire, tank, rail car is involved, a 1 mile in all distances should be the evacuation radius. So they're literally pulling that from the ERG and not making an informed decision based on the quantities and the number of cars there. I know it's a flawed decision making, but you have people making decisions without actually taking
So what,
the context of
Ryan,
what they
why
have
you're saying
before
it's
them
more
and
ignorance?
making
It's
that
you're saying,
decision.
Ryan, it's more ignorance, more stupidity rather than intention.
No, it's actually CYA. I think what Ryan is saying is more they're covering their butt because they have a document that is allowing them to do so. What I'm saying is I really do think that they don't want this to be a bigger story than it is. And so if they evacuated people for an extended period of time, this would become, again, there's a true belief that I have. And you guys have known me for some time, Mario.
I was going to say
I
that.
am not this kind of
Yeah,
person.
Dr. Dean, I was about to say that before Ryan jumped in. I was going to say for the audience, Dr. Dean is always on stage and he's usually pushing back against constantly and getting hate for it, pushing back against theories or what some would call conspiracy theories or anything that's not proven by fact. So I'm a bit surprised you've come in with this sentiment, Doctor.
It's a track record,
So
Mario.
can I
These
weigh
industries
in?
have a
Can
track
I
record.
weigh in as an emergency physician who has done a lot of EMS and a medical toxicologist that knows a little bit about or a fair amount about exposures. So so when I think that this was actually that the radius was actually because of the potential for an explosion rather than some kind of we're going to try to minimize the potential effects. I think that it was actually the effect of the localized area of explosion could go out for a mile. And I'm happy to try to bring people who are experts on explosions into this discussion, because I think that actually weighed into it. The second thing is that the explosive effect of this actually mitigates the toxicity. So when you're talking about vinyl chloride as a carcinogen, that is after multiple doses and exposure over years and years and years, as opposed to an acute exposure. And so I think that the difference is vast. I think that people were worried about an explosive injury, and that's why they had a perimeter of a mile around it. And then in terms of long-term effects, I don't think vinyl chloride is going to cause long-term cancer effects in people because it gets burned up. So it's not repeat exposures to the parent compound for decades.
So Liza,
Liz is
you're telling me
100%
that
right,
you
by
would
the way,
feel
about the
comfortable. I'm sorry. I want to push back a little because I actually spoken to another toxicologist who is actually a WashU alum too, which is interesting. So they said that in a normal situation, when there is a controlled explosion of vinyl chloride, according to this person, I'm happy to connect you to, you would say that it's okay for people to return back to their homes within a day?
So vinyl chloride has a half-life in the atmosphere of 1 to 2 days. So it's gone theoretically by 4 days, as opposed and the people who with hepatic angiosarcoma, which is the specific cancer it's associated with, were exposed to it daily for a decade or so. And for long times during the day. So I think it's getting burned up in the atmosphere, and I don't think that it presents the same kind of risk that long-term chronic exposures present. So I'm not trying to.
So again, I'm going to ask the specific
Yeah.
question that I just asked because that is the specific question I asked my friend. And again, this is somebody who is just like you. We, all three of us trained at the same institution, right? And he said he would not feel comfortable. That the smart thing to do in this situation is we've actually never seen a situation like this. According to him, it's not a common situation. So therefore, an abundance of caution makes sense from a public
Absolutely. I
health
have
perspective.
no problem with an abundance of caution. Absolutely. But I think
And so us saying on a stage with thousands of
yes,
people.
I think that the cancer risk is very low. I think that the reason why they did why they evacuated that perimeter, that is because of the explosion risk. And I think it's important to separate those things out. And we probably, I may have possibly trained the person that you talked to since I started the toxicology program at WashU. But long and short is, I think that you see cancer in a very specific kind of cancer, hepatic angiosarcoma, in people who have long-term exposures to this chemical. And what I think we saw here is a very short-term exposure, and it not only did it volatilize, but it got burned up. So
what about the byproducts of this?
So the byproducts,
you know, hydrochloric acid.
Yeah, so the byproducts of this so there are a couple of byproducts. So there's hydrogen chloride. When it comes into contact with water, it turns into hydrochloric acid. So I think that you can see some short-term effects of hydrochloric acid that cause burning in people's eyes and can cause respiratory problems and things like that. You also have carbon dioxide, which all the people who are involved in climate get worried about that. You have a short-term increase in carbon monoxide, which can cause problems with people. And then but that won't be a long-term problem as well. And then there's a very small amount turns into phosgene. And phosgene was a World War I gas that was used that was problematic. I don't think you're seeing enough phosgene, and that you're going to have long-term. If people were exposed to a high enough level of phosgene around this explosion, you would have seen overwhelming numbers of people going to the hospital 24 hours after the explosion with respiratory complaints. And not just respiratory complaints, they would have significant respiratory failure. So I would love to see the data that's coming from hospitals around this, because that's what people would have if they had a significant phosgene exposure.
Yeah, so I do want to get Dr. Joanna in here.
Sure.
Have you heard the reports to? Was that okay? Yeah, that was you. I want to let you give your overall opinion, but I also want to ask you a question that maybe you can tack onto the end here. We've heard a lot of reports today, especially about people, having headaches and sicknesses and such. And I believe there were several publications that reported that. So I want your opinion on that, but I also want your opinion on the whole situation.
Sure. Yeah, no. So just kind of taking a step back and reframing some of the things that Dr. Liza and Dr. Dinesh both mentioned. I think both people actually brought up some really great points. I think that thinking first about the explosion itself and the physical risk, and then the chemical acute and chronic risks is really important to consider. And I myself, just for your audience, I'm a physician, and I had the opportunity to speak with actually a chemist who works for the military right now. And I also spoke with an engineer who works in water mechanics and dynamics, which was kind of fun and interesting. But first, one thing that was brought up was what we need to decipher is what was in the cars themselves. And everybody's talking about vinyl chloride. It's the biggest concern, this risk because of its flammability, that it may produce hydrochloric acid and phosgene, of course, and I think that as far as the acute response goes, absolutely, these byproducts can lead to breathing problems, can cause shortness of breath, are corrosive, can cause necrosis of bronchial epithelium. And Dr. Liza is 100% on the money. Absolutely. People would be, showing up to the hospital in droves in response to these byproducts specifically. But there were other chemicals that also really are worth talking about, and those are acrylates. So in particular, 2-ethylhexyl acrylate, which also has a toxic exposure limit. Something that nobody's really even mentioned yet. There were others, isobutylene, which causes dizziness and drowsiness. These are things that are kind of at the top of my mind, as far as kind of not just the acute response, but also thinking downstream, for chronic exposure to these things, which may be carcinogenic. So I have listened into a couple of spaces, including this one. And one thing I have not come across, although in my reading it was suggested, they are saying that people may be able to come back to East Palestine now, but I don't know what they're recommending regarding drinking and the water. And that was another, as I mentioned, interesting conversation, because everybody's talking about the Ohio River, but we need to keep in mind that there are water treatment plants and settling tanks and evaporation tanks, just for these reasons. So they're really going to be doubling down, and they can actually isolate out the Ohio River if they so choose to. But thinking about aquifers and thinking about seeping that actually happens just regionally, I think that that's going to be a long-term problem. And one of your guests really eloquently brought up the fact that the EPA has not reported on this in something like 10 days. So I think that's the most relevant concern at this point in my mind, just the water. But going a step beyond that, though, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. No. Go ahead, Jane.
No, just to finish, just to kind of wrap up with that second part of your question, people are smelling it in the air, and that's the acrylates. That has an odor, and sometimes it smells really bad, and sometimes it's pretty sweet, actually. But they're smelling that. But smelling it does not necessarily mean that you are you're at a toxic exposure threshold. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That doesn't mean that I necessarily believe that due diligence has been performed completely for all of these chemicals that have been listed. I would need more information. But I'm not surprised if people, are reporting dizziness, drowsiness, some of those things that were mentioned.
So, Liza, you were mentioning that you were talking about earlier how long this stuff might linger in the air, especially the vinyl chloride. If you're still smelling it in the air, is it safe to say, Dr. Joanna said that it may not be at a hazardous level at that point? Liza? Maybe not. All right, so we'll stick to that point
I'm
anyway.
sorry, I couldn't get
Oh,
on.
there you are.
I was on mute. So I think that in any time you have a chemical explosion, that you are prone to smelling things in the air for several days after that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's vinyl chloride that you're smelling. There are all sorts of volatile organic compounds that are floating around that you could smell for a while, and it's hard to tease out what's what in that kind of setting. What I want to reassure people about is that I don't think they're going to get cancer from this, and I think that people are understandably and justifiably terrified. But the way this particular group of chemicals works, there's with an acute exposure, I think there's more risk from the actual explosion than there are from the chemicals, and I think that once again, this is an absolute failure to communicate in terms of the public health authorities and the different agencies. I think that people have sort of said, minimized it, and I don't think I think that people are scared, and I think it's really important to address the fears that people have.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the root of the problem.
So we are going to be on the ground there tomorrow, and we are going to be pressing pretty hard on these people. We're going to go around. We're actually going to talk to residents. We're going to talk to first responders. We're going to talk to people from the EPA and city officials as well, just to see, what their thoughts on it are. Because we can speculate all they want to, or all we want to, but if we can actually be there talking to these people, what the mainstream media aren't doing, I think that it'll be super important for us to do that. And so we'll have another space on this tomorrow as well. For right now, we're going to keep going. But Intel, I want to bring you in because you have more to add on this.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, a lot of the railroads tend to be fairly independent, and as such, like they don't have the greatest transparency, and it's kind of hard to find a lot of these updates. So the EPA has, and this is the same thing with the EPA, not just the railroads. The EPA does have a website that they have set up with daily updates on what they've been doing and what's been happening, and they also have contact information from, like here's our public affairs officer, or like Norfolk Southern hotline and a couple other emergency management numbers and etc. But they have been putting updates there. Like I said, it's not that they're like intentionally hiding stuff. It's just the way train accidents and like the investigation cleanup works. Like, it's not that they're hiding it. It's just like they have their little niche communication network that 99.9% of the public isn't aware of. And so like they've just been doing what they always do. So like those updates you can find, but it takes a little bit of digging. I did put in the comments specifically the EPA daily updates of what they've been doing and the situation there. In regards to the, I'll let someone else go if you want.
Well, no. I want to ask. I want to ask you for clarification on that. You're saying that their updates are a little slow, sometimes hard to find. And are they pretty vague? Are they actually giving information that the EPA, the federal government, should be giving on a situation like this?
I personally don't think these updates are very big. I think there could be more to them. So, like example, today's update's fairly short. Re-entry air screenings are underway. Community air monitoring will continue operating 24 hours a day. As of yesterday evening, 291 homes have been screened. To date, no detection of vinyl chloride or hydrogen chloride were identified for the completed screen homes. There are 181 homes that remain to be screened. EPA has deployed 2 more SUMA air sampling canisters for continuous sampling. Local schools and the library were screened yesterday. U.S. EPA's network of air monitoring stations throughout the East Palestine area did not detect anything above the action level.
Mm-hmm.
But are they only checking for vinyl chloride, or are they checking for these other acrylates? That's what I'm concerned about.
Specifically, what they've put in their updates is they're detecting for vinyl chloride or hydrogen chloride. But with the fire department side of the house, they have their own, and same thing with like the state hazmat teams under the Department of Public Safety. They have various gas meters and go around testing for all kinds of gases to make sure areas are safe. So the EPA is looking for specific chemicals. The fire departments and the hazmat teams have instrumentation that can search for broader detections of various chemicals and what levels those are at.
And I hope that they report on those. I hope that they report on those acrylates, because I think it's really the chronic downstream things that we have to worry about, once we get out of this acute window with the concern for vinyl chloride.
Yeah.
So all source, I want to bring you in here, and then we're going to go to Bricksuit after that, kind of get his synopsis as well. Bricksuit, or I'm sorry, all source, jump in.
No, yeah, I just wanted to confirm, Liz, you brought up an excellent point. Yes, the evacuation was specifically because of the concerns of the explosion, the 1 mile radius. That was mentioned by Governor Dwight, and that's all the reporting we got. The concern was the risk of the explosion and the casualties they had. It was not because of chemical exposure. So I just wanted to provide that's a confirmation, Liz, that you are correct. It was the explosion that they were concerned about the most, rather than chemical exposure.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Bricksuit.
Hey, I just want to talk. A lot of great info in here. I know a few of the topics I could speak about, but what I really want to talk about is the incidence of these type of derailments. And 99.9, and we can go a few more nines, repeating % of Americans never ever interact with train derailments in their normal daily life. They have no reason to know about it, except when a story is major and breaks in the news. And I think that right now people are really hypersensitized to these derailments, to the point where There was one in South Carolina and one in Texas today, and people are going, what's going on with all these derailments? It's crazy, 2 in one day. And, actually, that's below average. The average derailment that you have in the US is about 2.7, 2.9 over the last 4 years. And, that's from the Federal Railway Administration figures. That's per day. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
Jesus.
per day. And that's only, and that covers only derailments in which over $10,700 worth of damage is done, and the derailment is not caused by an explosion, a collision between two trains, or by an impact at a grade crossing where the train tracks cross a road. So if a train is going across one of those crossings and there's a semi stuck and that causes a derailment, that's not in these derailment stats. That's not what happened here. The derailment of this train was obviously a mechanical failure, and that would be one of those. For instance, last year there were 1,044 such derailments of that type within the United States. So that's an average of, like I said, 2.7 per day. So they're much more common than people think. And what's going to happen starting today and going forward for the next couple of days is every single derailment is going to have people raising the conspiracy flag. And I just don't see any link between this derailment as something to take pressure off the balloons or vice versa, the balloons to take pressure off of this. What's happening is our great biological computers that we have in our skull, boy, they've got an evolutionary mandate to form patterns, to associate happenings with outcomes. And so when we see two things happening together, we naturally think that they can be interrelated in some way. That's not what's happening here. These are two discrete events that are taking place. In this case, I don't see any correlation between them. One's not covering for the other. It's much, much more plausible to use Occam's razor and say that the rail accident was caused by basically a confluence of many factors, but all related to railway companies over the last 20 years inexorably driving to raise profits by reducing maintenance costs and right-of-way costs and lowering crew requirements.
So before anybody else jumps in here, I got to go to Matthias with Breaking 4 News there to give us an update on that shooting up there in Michigan.
Yeah, so what we're hearing right now, just to remind people of what we're dealing with, approximately an hour and a half ago, we received reports from Michigan State University Police that they were responding to an active shooter situation on campus. We can confirm there are multiple victims. There are unconfirmed reports of fatalities. But what's interesting here is we have access to the initial scanner reporting where we can hear exactly what transpired in the early moments of the shooting. So I'm going to play that for you right now.
MSU units, I got a shot fire complaint at Berkey 509 East Circle. 509 East Circle, multiple callers calling it in right now. 636-653 units are clear to respond. 653 now. County units, be advised, MSU is responding to a shots fired in the hallway of Berkey Hall. Need units prior. County units for shooting is going to be in Berkey Hall at MSU 509 East Circle Drive. I need units clear. Info for command. There's going to be a shooting victim. I'm trying to get further. I have a victim who's with the victim online on the phone.
5-6, do they need the units out there as well? 5540, Charlie, basketball game.
I can't get further right now. They do have the door barricaded. There's someone in room 135 shot as well. Room 114 and room 135, we have lots of medics en route. Just be advised, they're advising that there's multiple victims in room 114. They're advising that the shooter's in the hallway and still trying to get a description.
Lansing North on units on active shooting at Berkey Hall and MSU 509 East Circle Drive, 509 East Circle Drive. We got multiple victims at this time. Please be clear up.
I don't have anyone I'm seeing yet. All I have so far is that there's a shooter in the hallway, multiple people shot in dorm room or in classroom 114, and there's people from room 135 135 who are jumping out of a window currently. Advising that there's one subject who's not breathing, who's shot in the head. We're trying to get further.
All right, so clearly a very serious situation unfolding on the scene of Michigan State University. Two of the main points that we can get from that scanner information is that they early on declared this as an active shooter situation with multiple victims found in multiple locations, and students actually had to jump out the windows at certain points to avoid the suspect. So we will bring you the latest as we get it.
Am I correct in hearing that there was a basketball game going on at the time?
The second scene that was reported to be a shooting was at a basketball court. That has since been declared as not a shooting scene. There was initial reports of a second shooting scene at a basketball court with victims. That has been cleared and is no longer considered a threat.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do here, Ian? Sorry, were you trying to say something?
I just think thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, awesome. So what we're going to do here, because what we're doing is we're taking the round table show here on the road tomorrow. We're actually going to East Palestine, and we're going to do a live report there. Like I said, we're going to talk to people on the ground and get their feedback on what they saw. You know, residents there, are they worried? Have they been feeling sick? Are they worried about their livestock? And city officials and how they're thinking that they need to handle it. So that's going to be tomorrow. You can see this as like a precursor space for it. And so I need to get out of here fairly shortly. So we're going to wrap. But Liza, I want to ask you real quick, what would you recommend I be wearing for PPE to be on the ground in East Palestine? Well, Joanna, you might be able to answer that question, or Dr. Denise, somebody.
Liza, Joanna, we're gonna have Nick in the middle of the war zone. We need to give him some precaution. I told him not to go, and he fought with me wanting to go because he's got a mental disorder. So what should he wear?
Only drink bottled water. Only drink bottled water at the point.
And go for a swim.
So so I think that if the fires are out and everything, you could defer to the local fire department and the hazmat team. I would follow what they're doing. If you were in a situation where there were acute fumes being burned and things like that, then I would probably have a self-contained breathing apparatus kind of in that situation. But I think by the time you get there, the situation on the ground is going to be very different. And I think that I would look to the people who are dealing with the wreck there and see what they're wearing. I suspect it won't have to be. It sounded to me the last time I checked that the fires are out and you're probably okay just with ambient air.
Apparently, there is still smolder. So that was a report that I saw today. Dr. Denise, I think, has a different opinion on this, though, Liza.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, Liza, you wouldn't wear a respirator?
I would wear a respirator if there was a acute burning and things like that. But we're talking about that. I don't know what's happening on the ground right now, and I would defer to the local hazmat people. But if it were an acute situation, I would absolutely wear a respirator. A NIOSH recommended self-contained breathing, scuba stuff, right? So I would definitely go with if there were acute fumes and stuff like that. But we're now getting into 5 days out. What this happened Friday? When did it happen?
February 3rd.
Okay, so we're fairly far out now, and so I think I would defer to what the local hazmat people are saying. I think that the situation is probably not as volatile now as it was then, and it depends on what zone you're in terms of the fires and stuff as well.
Right. I guess I guess by by that I'm probably going to go with Dr. Denise on that.
That's fine.
But
That's fine.
Just being honest. But
That's absolutely fine.
No,
It's
no,
better
no,
safe
no.
than
Liza,
sorry.
Liza.
But
Dr. Mario's got a better recommendation than Dr. Denish.
what's
So
that?
the option of not going there is relatively safe, considering this is what I know
There
and the
you go.
circumstances, as I said multiple times. So that'd be my bet. I don't know if you have a better solution.
he just
Dr.
wants that on the
You could-
record. He just wants it on the record. That's all.
You could you take the precautionary principle and don't go find out.
I want to
anything.
see.
That was
Let's see what the audience thinks. Like, audience, go to the bottom right corner and please tell Nick to wake up and stay home and wear a respirator at home as well. Denise, do you agree? Denise will probably go with you.
Yeah, I'm a
I'm
journalist
okay.
and I live 30 miles away from East Palestine, and I'm not trying to drive anywhere near that.
there you go.
But
Well,
as somebody who lives near this disaster, I did want to ask a question to Joanna, Liza, and Dr. Dinesh, if that's okay, just because I am concerned for my health and my children's health. Um, one of the tank cars that lost its load was actually full of ethylene glycol.
Mhm.
And so I'm worried about that having gotten into the water supply. And I'm somebody who has a well for my home. So if that got into the water and the water table, are our wells safe? Like, how much does it need to be diluted for it to not be harmful for us for drinking versus bathing?
So I
So
suspect that.
it depends. Yeah, go ahead, Liza.
So yeah, so I just as background, I don't know if I've told anybody this, but I'm a medical toxicologist, and I took care of a lot of people who had ethylene glycol poisoning. So I suspect that you are far enough downstream, and you've got enough dilution that it's not going to be an issue. I think that that the people who get into trouble with ethylene glycol poisoning are people who have suicidal attempts with that kind of thing. So I don't think you need to worry. You can absolutely have your well tested. I think if there's any trace of it, it's going to be a very, very minute amount, and it's not going to be a problem that you need to be concerned about having a negative outcome.
And I
Okay,
would echo some of that. I would say it really depends on what your water source is. You know, if because groundwater, and again, kind of well water aquifers, as opposed to the water source that we were talking about from the Ohio River. I would advise you the way that I would advise my own family, and that is, I would say, drink bottled water until you are sure that it's safe. And that's my advice.
And I don't think there's any harm in that advice, but I don't think you need to be unduly scared, but I don't think there's any harm in that advice.
I just think
Especially,
it's very
especially if
simple.
your well is, the bottom of your well is above the height of the river, then that's not, it's not going to transfer uphill. Your well may be charged from an aquifer draining from a watershed that's well upstream from wherever the spill site is. So there's other factors that are physical in nature in terms of the structure of your well to consider.
Yeah, I think until you get until this, just my opinion for your mental and physical health is, until you get it tested, just do what Joanna was saying. I think it's just I don't see the value of stressing yourself out over something like this. If you can afford it, get some bottled water and feel safe. But yeah, I mean, obviously Liza is the expert.
Kristen, you are an industrial hygienist, a hazmat expert, and I thought you would be perfect to bring up on stage for this while we kind of wrap and I go into the danger zone, I guess. Give us your opinion on that. What kind of PPE would you recommend? And do you think that this is still a volatile situation where, if you were a resident, would you be worried?
Hi. Well, first off, I just want to first off explain to everyone. I've been screaming to get on here. I've been asking for a space all day. I worked in bioenvironmental engineering. My background is occupational environmental toxicology. I'm RCRA trained, DOT hazardous materials trained, specifically trained on train derailments because I managed the decon program for these type of responses in the city of Chicago. This is literally my wheelhouse, and it's a little infuriating hearing people not understanding the severity of this. I understand we have MDs on here and toxicologists, but I'm the one that goes out there and samples this upwind, downwind, air, soil, water. This is bad. And what people are not understanding is the synergistic and systemic exposure. when you look at the load and the manifest of these trains, you are dealing with the same target organs. And although vinyl chloride can dissipate after 3 to 4 days, that's in certain weather conditions. We have a storm system coming through right now with moisture. And when it starts to break down, it's not just you have to worry about phosgene. Formaldehyde is what it can turn into. So you can't just look at one chemical. You have to look at a myriad of chemicals here. And I am really frustrated with the EPA because I worked for the federal government for 12 years, 9 in the military. The EPA is trash and needs to be privatized. I heard somebody say that, you know, the messaging is private. No, they hire their own firms. They get IHs and EHS professionals who have no morals to do this testing. What sampling media are they using? Are they using, they can say they're sampling, but are they using different sampling things that deal with different polymers? I don't want to get too technical, but again, I'm the one that goes and does the sampling, so I know how corrupt the government is. I'm not trying to sit here and freak people out, but what I want you to understand, this is, no one is able to say this is safe for people to go back, especially for pregnant women. This is mutagenic. This is highly hazardous to pregnant women. Fetal protection is also part of my job. So if you're going to go there on the ground, find a fire department that has something called a HAB site. They have this little wand and it can basically detect anything in the air, and they should have a set cordon, but at a minimum, you need an organic vapor gas cartridge. You need HEPA, OV, and P100. So you need like a black, green, and pink filter on a full face respirator because this has an eye hazard, respiratory hazard. And the thing is we're talking about acute exposure, where the problem is that these types of hazards with the same synergistic target organ exposure, in 15 minutes at 5 parts per million can completely harm you. It can kill you. So this is bad. And I'm not trying to like bash the doctors here. I respect you all. But this is more the profession of occupational health doctors that I work with, because we actually study these chemicals every single day when there are overexposures in the workplace. So these types of things are usually presented to the average layperson. So this is a huge cluster. You know what I'm trying to say. So please don't take this as I'm bashing other doctors. I love what they said. They have points. And yes, it's not, oh, this is bad. It has a dissipation rates, half-lives. But this is an IDLH. This is immediately dangerous to life. And yes, it happened a long time ago, but the exposures are there. And you may not always have an immediate effect. It can be a latent effect, and it can cause massive buildup of mucus in your lungs. And this can cause people to basically dry drown. So you may not see these things right away. But it's kind of like when COVID went around, everyone's like, oh, I have a cough, and everyone thinks that they're sick. So don't do that. But this is a time maybe where people have allergies and different things. But this weather pattern coming is what has me concerned. And I know this is the end, but please, if you're dealing with anything with PPE, hazardous materials, environmental, please bring me on, because I worked for the government for so long and I know how dirty they are.
Well, we're definitely going to have you back on here tomorrow when we do the live show from the ground. Because I think your opinion is going to be super informative and super valuable. So thank you so much for coming up, even though it was a little bit last second. But Liza, go ahead.
So yeah, I've got to go. But really quickly, once again, the acute exposure is the issue. I think that people who have acute exposures to high concentrations have a problem. And with phosgene in particular, that can take a 24-hour time frame to manifest. I don't think that now that we're several days out, that people are going to have, and I'm trying to reassure people, not because I want to hide anything or anything like that, but this is the way these chemicals work. I think that we are out of the window of acute exposure toxicity. And I don't think that without long-term chronic exposures, people are at higher risk of cancer. And I understand that people are scared, and justifiably so. But that's my takeaway, and I'm happy to contribute tomorrow.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm going to give a couple people here the chance to do a final statement for us. Dr. Dinesh, jump in with your quick 30-second final statement. We'll go to Millie, who is a journalist that I believe you said lives somewhere in the area. And then I want Frank and Ian as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think, to go back to the original point, which is we actually know less than we think we do. I think there's a lot of things out there that are still to be determined. I still disagree, even though Liza made a very convincing case. When it comes down to it, we take caution in so many things, but for some reason, we felt very comfortable with people going back so quickly. And I feel very, I think that is highly suspect, and it's completely outside of the norm. And I think that is something that will continue to cause me a lot of pause. We will look back and we will see that this may have caused more harm than what is being led away right now. And I think it is being sort of not becoming a big story for a variety of reasons.
And so we'll cover a lot more about that tomorrow as well. Frank, jump in.
Yeah, my closing statement, I made this earlier. It's about the water at this point. That's my predominant concern. And I've shared some DMs with a few people. Check my timeline. I've got the links to the EPA's updates, and their last surface water test public updates that they released was on February 4th. I find it extremely hard to believe that they haven't tested since February 4th. So why are we slow rolling results? Okay. And if you're in the area, I 100% agree with all the other speakers. Drink bottled water. I don't know about showering, but I'd really like to see water results, especially because of the creek contamination that we know happened, because 15 miles away, we were testing positive for butyl acrylate. So please focus on the water, put pressure on the EPA. Let's get the water quality reports published. 9 days is far too long, especially since the controlled demolition was not 9 days ago. It was like 6 days ago. Why haven't we seen water results since then? That's it. Thank you. Good night.
Let me ask you very quickly, Frank.
Yeah.
Can individuals take their own sort of water samples and get any valuable data out of that?
Yes, you 100% can. In fact, Norfolk Southern and some local water utilities are providing free water tests, so you can test your water free. My comments was about the surface water pollution. That's a big concern. So whatever's on the surface and what's made its way down the creeks and estuaries and so forth has a high probability of winding up in the ground. Unfortunately, there's a large time delay between surface contamination and groundwater table contamination. So testing water tables is something that should happen immediately at every residence. People should be testing their water in that area, and that's going to be prolonged. Again, on my timeline, I've got links as to the protocols for some of the spilled chemicals, testing duration, frequency, et cetera. I've listed there for people to reference. But the EPA, 9 days, slow rolling surface water contamination, which is easy to test. I just don't see a good reason as to why they would not be publishing that. They were really quick to release it within 3 days of the original derailment. And now we've got 9 days since that and haven't seen anything.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Millie, I know you said you live in the area, and I know you're a journalist. So let's get your final thoughts for 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I just want to say also I appreciate everyone taking the time to investigate and get to the bottom of this, because, just as somebody who's personally affected by this, and I'm definitely having a bit of anxiety and worry about my health and my family's health and my neighbors. So I'm definitely going to be doing the water test as well on my well, and I will be posting that just to kind of give everybody an idea. But, Nick, when you come out this way, maybe you could help go to different houses miles out and find out, like, hey, can I get a water sample? We're going to go test it. And you could actually put some data together that would be really interesting to look at, to see if you can actually see this chemical dilution or where people are being affected. But yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's spending their time doing this, because it's really helpful, and especially the doctors as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Millie. Ian, are you still around?
Yeah, I am. My final thoughts is that it's less to do with the derailment, and I think this speaks to a more systemic problem that we're seeing in America right now, which is the complete breakdown of the infrastructure. Right? It's they're cutting costs. The Biden administration is not really doing much to fix the situation. I mean, just infrastructure in general. I mean, their priorities are all out of whack. If you look at what Pete Buttigieg said earlier today, he didn't even address it until he was pressured to do so and put out a tweet, right? But during the press conference, his big talk, his big speech about trains was that there's too many white people working on them. and this speaks volumes as to why we're seeing this systemic breakdown of everything happening right now. It's the priorities all completely out of whack, and until the Biden administration or the next one gets its act together, we're going to see more and more disasters like this unfold.
Ian, did anybody point out that he's actually white too? I mean, he's at the top of the pyramid.
Oh, but
there.
he's gay, so that means he's he's not really white. Yeah.
Oh my God. All right, I'm not going to comment on that. But I just want to remind everybody: follow Mario, follow Ian, follow me. We're going to be giving updates here as time goes on. As we get to the area. We're bringing a lot of equipment, so we're going to have a lot of footage. We're going to have, drone footage. We're going to have, footage of the town, and I'm going to interview people that are on the ground as well. And so we should have some really interesting conversations with them. We'll have some interesting content, and I'm really excited to be able to do this show from there tomorrow. Kristen, I'm going to be DMing you because I need you to tell me exactly what to get here. So Mario, I'll let you finish up here.
Yeah, not much, man. I think it's a great space, and we'll keep you all updated if there's more developments tomorrow. If not, we'll be tweeting it. Rose Alerts and Breaking 4 News have been doing a great job covering the story, among other panelists, as they've covered all stories. So check out their pages as well. Yeah, great space. Really appreciate it. Nick, you've done a lot of the work for this one. Thanks a lot for the panel, and good to see Eliza, Joanna, and Dr. Denish, or Dr. Dunn, and Dr. Aiken on stage together. It's been a while since the COVID spaces. Love you all. Thank you so much, and see you on the next one.